I'm Sleep Aid, your local sleep paralysis demon, and today we are going to be taking a look at another 10 Webtoon Legends contest entries. As you may know, I made a post on the Canvas subreddit asking for entries to review, and I've received several responses, and so we have many dozen to get through, and this is going to be numbers 21 through 30, so we're going to be looking at Paranormal Inquisitors, Lovestuck, Fragments of the Wounds, the Song of Ouroboros, Astralnauts, Gilded Offering, No Strings Attached, Eclipsed, Dragon Blade, and Swallow. So, these are all taken just in the order that they were submitted to the Reddit post, and I want to reiterate that our focus on these is namely on pacing and how well these contest entries capture the genre, how well they sell the stories that they are meant to be submitting to this contest. And so I'm looking at these the way possibly that judges might, in terms of how well they're able to envision them as potential original series or potential winners of the contest. So do keep that in mind. These are not standard reviews. I'm looking at these specifically as they are in the context of this contest. So let's go ahead and flip over to our first series. This is Paranormal Inquisitors by Benj G. We'll have a quick look at our description here. It says, Simon, a falsely accused death row inmate, finds himself being sacrificed by occultists, but then was saved by a mysterious priest named Karioth. With nowhere to go, he joined Karioth in his crusade in a world filled with monsters, demons, and the occult. So, this is a supernatural thriller, and it's a little bit hard to categorize because it is obviously a supernatural series and it is very thrilling. It contains very graphic and violent scenes and dark themes of the occult and things of that nature, but it also appears to have a somewhat of a slant toward action in it. It's a very interesting comic, and I do feel that it is pretty well made. You can tell that this is something that the creator has been probably working on for a while. And it has a sense of intentionality to it. There's a clear direction that the story is going, and a lot of thought has obviously been put into this. I like the artwork. I think that it does a good job of portraying what it's trying to do, and the story does seem to have a sense of direction. It's clear that there's a lot of background lore here, that there is a broader direction the plot is going to go. In terms of pacing, I do think that it could potentially be paced a little bit more deliberately for Webtoon. What they tend to look for is by the third episode, you really want to have the hook of the series kind of set out. You want to have the entire framework of the series laid out within the first 3 episodes, because that is kind of like your intro to the readers, and that is where they will often decide if they want to keep reading this story or not. And this one takes a little bit longer than 3 episodes to kind of get into what direction it's going to go, and it sets itself up a little bit slowly. And at first, it isn't clear who our main characters are going to be or what direction the plot might be going in. So I do think that there are very good ideas here and a very interesting story. But perhaps a little bit more focus on the first 3 episodes would be good, whereas we do spend a lot of time over the course of the episodes that we have for this submission. We spend a lot of time setting up later conflicts, which is good, but we also want to make sure that our intro starts off with a satisfying enough arc to where we can kind of get an impression of where this story is going to go tone-wise, what it's going to be like in the long run. And so this is kind of what I mean when I say that I'm looking at these from the perspective of contest entries, because as a series that already has a lot of planning behind it, that already knows where it's going to go, you can pace it a little bit more slowly, because you know that the interesting things are going to come later, that you know that you're building towards something. But for a contest entry, you want to kind of show more of that a little bit more quickly. And so we spend a lot of time building up this war that's going on in the background of humanity between these dark entities, and this conflict between the priests and the demons and things like that. But there are a lot of story elements that seem like they're going to pay off in a big way later that maybe we could spend less time on because they aren't important right away. But I do think that this is a very good series with a lot of potential, and I like that it sets ground rules. It establishes the way that this world works, why things are the way they are, and kind of how the magical powers, how the demons, how the occult things work, where they stem from. And there's an internal mechanism, there's internal rules that it follows, and that's usually a good sign that the author has thought a lot about their idea, that they have a good sense of direction and where this might go. And it also allows the reader to understand why things are happening the way they are in the story. So there's a lot that's very well done here, and it utilizes interesting local lore and interesting mythology that you probably don't see too often. So instead of just vampires and werewolves and more typical, more common night beasts, it's using less common mythology. And so there are things that, if you are not familiar with them, can be very interesting and aren't seen as often. Some things that I think we should work on with this are getting a proofreader. It's clear that the writer of this does not speak English as a first language, and so there are a lot of grammatical errors, there are a lot of typos in this, and things where the text could be a little bit more clear in English. And so I think that it would be very beneficial to have someone look over it who speaks English natively and make those corrections to make sure that the readers aren't being confused by the dialogue, or to make sure that things aren't being lost in translation. One other thing that I think that we could do a little bit more of is building the reader's attachment to the characters. We know why the characters are doing what they're doing, but we only see bits and pieces of interactions that build their personalities out, and it would be nice to have a little bit more of that. There's such a laser focus on the mission, on the task at hand, at hunting monsters and fighting this war against the occult, but there's only a few moments where we really slow down and see the personality of our heroes, and a few more moments like that would help us build an attachment to them and really get invested in this mission that they are setting out on. So yes, this story does a lot of things really well. It obviously sets a lot of foreshadowing. It's building out a conflict. It's building out a direction that the story will take, and I think that it has a lot of potential, and it's very well done. So I'll go ahead and quickly jump through the rest of these episodes and make sure to put some likes on them. Sorry, I thought we were closer to the bottom here. That's another thing worth noting. Very long episodes here, which is good. It shows that they're not just hitting the minimum, but rather trying to tell a compelling story, and I think it does a good job at that. Alright, let me just jump to the bottom here and want to make sure to put a like on every episode. I do think that as an entry in the most gripping category, this one does a good job at setting the tone that fits the category. It's using supernatural as its primary genre. I've seen a lot of people label things as supernatural just because they contain ghosts or vampires or whatnot, but that don't really hit the gripping tone that the most gripping category is looking for. And so this one, I think, does a solid job of nailing that dark, unsettling tone and keeping a tense narrative that's constantly moving towards something, that's constantly playing at your expectations and kind of keeping you on the edge. So I'll very much like to see where this one goes, and I think it has done a very good job. Alright, next we're going to be taking a look at something entirely different. This is Lovestuck by Jake34. It is a romance drama. So, we'll take a look at the description. Kino is trying to get through college, keeping to himself and avoiding unnecessary connections, but life has other plans. As new people unexpectedly enter his life, Kino is forced to confront what it truly means to connect with friends, with relationships, and maybe even with love. But before he can figure any of that out, he first has to face the hardest challenge of all, stepping out of his comfort zone. Now, this is one that I had actually already read before. And so I did take another look over it and caught up on everything and gave it another read just to make sure that I was fresh and current on everything. And I have to say that this story does a very good job building out its characters and establishing relatable personalities and believable personalities. And so every character feels real. The character work in this is very, very good. And it does a good job at setting up kind of what seems like a slow burn romance. We know immediately from our first episode, from our first two episodes, we know immediately who our characters are that are going to be involved. There's obvious hints that show us where the romance is going to be taking place, who's going to be involved in it. And we slowly end up with these scenarios where our two main leads are constantly bumping into each other. That is a good thing and also something that I have a criticism of, which is just that the main leads are really only circumstantially connected. So they're constantly bumping into each other because our female lead is apparently clumsy. She drops her papers 3 or 4 times over the course of the comic, and so it feels like almost every interaction that we have between the main characters is predicated on her being clumsy and dropping something or bumping into somebody, and it feels a little bit overused as a device. It would be nice if there was a little bit more intentionality behind the interactions instead of everything just being the same coincidence 4 times in a row. But other than that, when these moments do happen, you as a reader are constantly left wanting more. They don't dive into it too quickly, and so we know that obviously, as this being a romance comic and with the foreshadowing placed where it is, we know that these characters are going to come together in some way, and we're just waiting to see how it happens. And so we're kind of kept wanting, which makes you want to keep reading it because you're curious to see how this is going to develop and how these coincidences are going to turn into some kind of relationship. Now, as a contest entry, I would say that perhaps the pacing could be a little bit more deliberate, as it is kind of a slice of life. We have characters just going about their ordinary lives, just going through their college orientation, just going through college situations, and so there's kind of a lack of intentionality. They're just doing things and they happen to bump into each other, and so we have these situations that develop naturally but don't really have a external framework kind of keeping them together other than just school and the class structure of school. So while it builds fun characters that have very fun interactions with each other, it does feel like it meanders a little bit, like we're just watching the daily life of our main character and he just happens to keep bumping into this girl by accident. That can be fine, but it would be nice if there was a little bit more of a structure to it that would help build anticipation, whereas instead we're just kind of left in the dark on what direction this is going to take. We're just waiting for the next coincidence to happen that brings these characters together again. However, again, like I said before, this comic does a very good job of building the characters' personalities, and they're very entertaining to watch interact. And so even though there isn't a very rigid structure to the plot, it's fun just to see the situations that the characters get into, because they all have such believable personalities. They play so well off of each other that just having them together and getting into these misadventures is enjoyable to read, and so you're kind of pulled forward by that. You kind of want to just see what's going to happen next because you enjoy the time that you're spending with the cast. It does that very well. there are a few things that I wish we had a little bit more detail in. For example, I don't think it's ever stated what our main character is studying in college. And so he's constantly putting a focus on studying. He wants to avoid people. He doesn't want unnecessary attachments. He'd rather keep his focus on studying, but we don't actually know what he's studying. We don't know what he's trying to accomplish at college, and so it doesn't feel like we can really root for his goal, like we could really get attached to whatever his plans are, because we don't really know much about them. And so that's the type of thing where obviously the studies are taking a backseat to the relationships, they're taking a backseat to the drama, but it would help us relate to the character more and kind of understand his perspective more if we knew a little bit more about what his goals were in life and why is he so willing to set aside connections for studying. So there's a little bit more that we could do there, I think, in that regard, but I do think that this series does a lot of things really, really well, and I think that it has a very good chance at placing in the finals for its category, because the most important aspect of a story like this, a more slice of lifestyle story, is the characters. Are the characters fun to engage with? Is it fun to root for them and see how their relationships develop? And in this case, yes it is. And so that's something that it needs to do right, and it does do right, and it does very well. So let's go ahead and jump through the remainder of the episodes and go ahead and put some likes on them. So yeah, I will be very curious to see where this one goes. I think it's definitely easy to get invested in, and it will be really fun to see how it develops. Alright, I'll go ahead and subscribe to that. We'll give it a rating, and good luck to you. Alright, next we'll be taking a look at Fragments of the Wounds by Mar May. This is a drama romance, and let's go ahead and have a look at our description. Upon waking in an unfamiliar body belonging to Yukari Sanada, Ahiro Fujisawa confronts the startling truth of her recent passing. As her soul intermittently swaps places with Sanada's, Ahiro finds herself navigating the complexities of their shared existence. Along the way, she connects with Kai Tsubaki, a friend from her previous life whose presence becomes a comforting constant amidst uncertainty. That's a pretty good summary that does a good job of kind of explaining what's going on, and as you can see, we have a lot of episodes here now. This series so far has been one of the ones that has got me the most intrigued. It starts with a really interesting premise, which is the soul of a departed woman being connected to the body of someone who's still alive, and so they're constantly swapping places back and forth. One day it's Ahiro, the next day it's Sanada, and so they don't share memories of the time that each other is in control, and so we have this interesting dynamic where two characters are constantly swapping. And when I first started reading this, I thought that it was going to be an isekai, but it's really not that at all. It's actually it's a character drama, and so it does a really good job of showing us through the perspectives of each different character the life that each of them led or is currently living. And so it immediately builds up intrigue in that, because we have our main character Ahiro, who doesn't know whose body she's been transported into, and so she's slowly discovering that by interacting with the people around her and interacting with the things in her life. And we also have a situation where Ahiro, our disembodied spirit, doesn't have clear memories of her own past life, and so she's slowly trying to discover that and how Sanada is connected to her, how all of these characters are connected, and why she has ended up here. It does a really good job of building intrigue with that, and it starts with a good premise, and it does a good job of fleshing that premise out. And I found that I really just wanted to keep reading it. I wanted to know more about it. I was constantly interested to see where it was going and what direction it was going to take. So I think this series does a really good job of that, even though it doesn't have the type of hook that you would expect on, say, an episode 3. Like, usually Webtoon is looking for that third episode hook. They want within the first 3 episodes you to have set up some kind of foundation for the story and end on some kind of lead-in that sets up intrigue for the remainder of the series. But this one doesn't do that by the 3rd episode, but the 1st episode establishes the premise so well that even though it doesn't have that massive 3rd episode cliffhanger, that 3rd episode hook, it's very easy to keep reading. And I found that I got through the episodes really quickly because I was constantly wondering what was going to happen next and where we were going to go and what was the solution to this mystery and what happened with these characters and everything like that. So I think it did a really, really good job of building interest, and I think for that reason it probably has good odds at maybe placing in the feels category. It seems like something that I could easily see as the premise for an original, and it does a good job at delivering that premise and constantly keeping you hooked on it, so it is very good work. There are a few things that I would suggest improving upon, though, which, as you may have noticed as I scroll through this, sometimes the text is smaller, sometimes it's larger, and if we look at this text, this is too small to read on a mobile device, so you want to make sure that when you're sizing the text, it can be seen on a mobile device. Most of the readers on Webtoon are reading on phones, and so that's something that they're going to be looking for. They want to make sure that it's formatted in a way that phone readers can easily digest the information, that they don't have to constantly zoom in to see what the text says. So formatting the text better would definitely help make this easier to read. It's also a good idea to make sure that all the text is the same size. You don't want to be constantly switching the size of the text because that's a little bit jarring on the eyes. It's a little bit disconcerting and it makes it flow less well. So standardizing the text size would be good, and also making sure that it is large enough would be good. Now, there is another complaint that I had reading through this. There are a couple sections in these middle episodes here where we spend a lot of time on the B-plot of the story, which is the architecture firm that the characters work at. And a lot of information is delivered about architecture as we set up conflicts that the firm is dealing with. And so we have long passages where characters are explaining architectural situations in great detail. A lot of this can be trimmed out. This is a little bit too much to read, and it's distracting from the main plot. It's okay to delve a little bit into this type of information, but we don't want to spend too long on it so that the reader is getting bored. We want to focus on the important aspects of it and kind of move on, whereas at times it can feel like you're reading an essay on different aspects of architecture, and I think it goes into a little bit too much detail sometimes. We should probably trim some of those sections down and get to the point as quickly as possible with those things so that casual readers can kind of grasp what's important but not feel overwhelmed with information. So that's the type of thing that sections like this, you would certainly edit this down and try to just get to the brass tacks of the matter, and try not to go too deep into it too quickly, because the reader doesn't necessarily want to get an education on architecture, and so it's important to talk about some of those important details, like how much you're able to change a project that's already begun, and whether or not you can raise the ceiling height without compromising the structural integrity. That stuff is important, but we don't need to go so far into detail on it. We want to use less text to convey those ideas so that we don't alienate anybody. Otherwise, though, I really liked this a lot, and I sincerely cannot wait to see where it goes. It's fully caught my attention. I like the characters a lot. It's very, very easy to get invested in them and want to see more from them. So I'll commend you on a job well done. Let me just go ahead and put likes on the remaining episodes. This is also an ongoing series on Canvas, and so It's worth noting there is an additional episode on the Canvas version outside of the contest. If you were as intrigued as me and wanted to read more of it, apparently this series it's going to be continuing either way because it was already in the works. So, very good job, and I wish you luck. Alright, let's go ahead and have a look at our next one, The Song of Ouroboros by artist Bianx. So, this is a fantasy crime mystery. And let's go ahead and have a look at the description. So, in a magical and fantasy world where folklore and humans evolved as a society with access to both magic and technology, we are following the story about a detective that helps bring justice to the city that he loves, so it can become safer and a beautiful place to live in. But will his views of justice change as he lives and survives in a world where appearances can be deceiving? This is an interesting series, and it sets out with an interesting premise, but I do think that it perhaps doesn't get deep enough into that premise. It spends a little bit too long setting itself up, and so by the end of the 3 episodes, we don't really know what it's actually about. So, a couple of quick notes, I would say. The text, it's using a more normal font, but for comics you want to use a serif font, a very tall font, and especially one that's a little bit more on the bold side. And more often comics will be in all caps with the font. You don't have to do this, but it just helps make it easier to read. And so, since we're using colored text bubbles here, we've got a beige background for our text, and we've also got this very narrow font. It can kind of blend together a little bit, and the reason that we typically will use black and white for our text balloons and very thick fonts is that it creates contrast. It makes it easier to read, and so with a comic, especially one that's going to be primarily read on a mobile device, you want to make sure that the text is as easy to read as possible. So I would recommend, if you're going to keep the beige background for the balloons, consider getting a thicker, more bold font that stands out more, because you want to make it really pop so that people don't have to struggle to read it at any point. Now, another thing on the topic of text balloons that you'll notice while reading this comic is that oftentimes the tails of the balloons either overlap the character or get right up against their mouth, and so it is a little bit distracting for that reason, because it feels like the balloon is massaging their face or, about to poke them in the mouth, or it's a little bit invasive. It's enough to just have the tail of the balloon point at the mouth of the character. It doesn't need to be this close, and so at this point it's intruding upon the artwork, and it's a little distracting. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing text balloons. If we just have a tail that points toward the mouth of the character, that is enough to indicate that the character is saying it, and that will be clear to anybody that's reading it. And so you don't have to have the tail intrude upon the artwork. You don't have to have it go across the character's face or over their neck or anything like that. That can be kind of distracting, so that's something to keep in mind. So another thing that this series could potentially work on is that it explains a lot of things that it could show us through more naturalized scenes. And so we spend a lot of time talking about different ideas or concepts, but we could be displaying those in a more natural scene. And so, for example, in episode 2 here, we have our main character's dad, who is working as a detective, and he's starting his first day at a new station in a new city that he's just moved to. And so here we have him introduced to his partner, who is this elf, and they have a long exchange about ground rules and how they're going to build trust with each other. But it feels a little unnatural the way that they're talking about these things. It seems like this is the type of conversation, these are the type of concepts that you could explore in a more immersive way, where instead of sitting down having a conversation about their feelings, we just see their personalities clash with each other and kind of coax those feelings out a little bit more. So that's the type of thing that I would consider integrating a little bit differently. We also have a situation where our main character, he is being bullied at school, and he's being bullied in a way that it's not obvious, and so he won't necessarily be noticed for it, so that the teachers won't see it, or that nobody will believe him. And so he's got a lot of bruises underneath his shirt and things like that. But again, this is all explained through dialogue, whereas this is the type of thing that could be put into a more naturalized scene. So up until this point, the story is about a kid and his family who have moved to a new city for his dad to get a job as a detective, and at school, because he is a half-breed, he's being bullied by orc students, and his father notices this and gives him a good luck charm, which appears to give him good luck, and then he makes a new friend, they become close, and that's kind of where we leave off. That's about all the information we get on the story. And then the dad starts his job as a detective. He meets his new partner, and it turns out that the detective partner is the father of his son's new good friend. And then we get a long explanation about the way magic works in the series, and building up to a ceremony where we'll have our characters find out what type of magic they have. And this is all exposition. It's done in a classroom scene, so it is a natural way of delivering this type of information. It's being taught to our characters the same time it's being taught to the audience, but it's a little bit too wordy. It's just a large passage of text. It kind of feels like reading a textbook at times, and so we want to make sure that even when we're demonstrating a classroom scene, that it doesn't feel like we the readers are in a class. We want to be a little more engaged about it, and this is the type of information that it can be difficult to deliver the level of detail that needs to be delivered in order for the audience to understand it, but you also want to make sure that it doesn't feel like a textbook. You want to make sure that it feels like it's been integrated into the scene in some way to where it's still entertaining, and I think we're dumping a little bit too much information too quickly with this one. And then that's our final episode, and we end after all of that explanation. It doesn't pay off yet, and so we can speculate on where this might go. We learn about the sixth type of magic that is very rare and uncommon and hasn't been seen in 80 years, and so we can kind of intuit as readers that one of our characters is probably going to have this, or we wouldn't have spent so much time building up the mystique about it. And so we might have a hint at where this is going to go, but we don't really know yet what the story is actually about. We've just got characters kind of interacting with each other, kind of doing things, but there's not a clear direction. And so it really leaves the reader wondering, well, what kind of story is this? What is the intention of this story? Where is it going to go? Especially since it's labeled as a crime and mystery. So far in these 4 episodes that we have, no crime or mystery has been introduced. We know that the dad is a detective, and so we can anticipate that some kind of detective work is probably going to happen, but we don't actually know what crime the detective might be investigating. We don't have a hint at any of that, really, and so that's something that just should be kept in mind, that we could get to those a little bit quicker. We want to make sure that by the 3rd episode, the reader understands what direction the story might be taking, what tone it's going to have, and what it's kind of about. But there are a lot of things that this story does well. It is fun to see these types of school stories where we have characters that are, forced to interact with each other daily at school, and how their dramas can play out, and how the different divides in their society can manifest. And so we've got a society of fantasy races all going to school together, and so we've got orcs and elves and half-breeds and things like that, and then we've got differing levels of magic that also establish different levels of prestige. Our main character talks about feeling poorer than the people in the neighborhood, and so all of that stuff sets a good foundation for different character dynamics and how these relationships can play out. But if it is, in fact, a crime and mystery in a fantasy setting, it would be nice to get to the crime mystery element a little sooner, and maybe set it up earlier, just so that we kind of know where we're going to go. And generally, if you have a story that's more of a slow burn, if it is going to spend a lot of time putting its pieces in order, introducing all of its key characters, then it's a good idea to start with a flash forward to the crime or the mystery element, just so that we know right away what we can expect later, even if it's going to take us a little while to get there. So there's a lot that we could adjust with the pacing of this, but I do think that there are some interesting ideas here. There are obviously some characters that the creator is very fond of and has put a lot of thought into, and so there's certainly potential here. Definitely keep it up, and I wish you luck. Alright, next we'll be having a look at Astralnauts by Cloverseed. This is an action sci-fi. Let's go ahead and look at the description, and then we'll take a look at it. It says, what lies on the other side of the wormhole? Humanity has received schematics for an intergalactic portal, but when 3 astronauts step through, they're flung into a centuries-old war on the other side of the universe. Together, with new teammates and powerful mechs, they race to gather allies and turn the tides against the tyrannical Kroth Empire. This is something I complained about a lot in the previous video, but oftentimes I've seen a lot of comics in the contest that have these grand descriptions kind of describing what the story is going to be about, but then those elements don't come into play in the episodes for the contest entry, and so it's good to have an intriguing description that sets up the scenario, that sets up the stakes, and tells the reader what to expect, but it's also important to note that those things should be in the episodes as well. We want to make sure that we're showing them to the reader in the comic, and we want to make sure that we're showing what form those elements will take in the comic and how we can expect them tonally and artistically. And so this comic starts out actually with a very interesting first episode. We have an alien character who appears to be exiting cryosleep and walking around a ship alone, and as we can see, we constantly have these cutaways, 14 hours remaining, and there's a clock that's counting down. She's only allowed to be awake for a certain amount of time, and she's begging the computer to, give her more time in the simulation rooms where she can feel like she's surrounded by other people having a conversation, and she's using her time in these different ways, and then at the end of it, alone on this spaceship, we find that she's waiting for someone. She's waiting for some kind of sign. She's just drifting and doesn't really know what's going on in the outer universe. And then she gets back in the pod and goes back to cryosleep for 80 years. And so that sets a very interesting emotional tone at the beginning of the comic, because here we have this forlorn alien who is alone on a spaceship and doesn't really get to live a normal life and is just kind of waiting for something to happen. She's out there waiting for something in space to come along and find her, and we don't really know what that means in the broader context, but it does create that intrigue where you're wondering, okay, is someone going to find her, and where is this going to lead? Who is she? Why is she on this spaceship? Why is it just out here drifting, waiting? Unfortunately, we then jump to a different scenario where we establish our other main characters, and we never connect back to that first episode. And that's the kind of thing where in a long series where you have a lot of time to build up and slowly pace things out, that would be fine. But in a 3-episode contest entry, we really want to make sure that everything that is here is adding to the overall quality of the work. And so if we set a tone of a forlorn alien drifting through space, and then we abandon that tone and don't retrace back to it within the contest entry, it kind of feels like it's not connected to what's going on here, and we don't really know why it's important yet. And so since we don't really circle back to that, it feels like it probably could be removed, and we might not necessarily need that for the contest entry. So it does create intrigue as a first episode, but since the other 2 episodes are not related to it, are about something entirely different, it just kind of feels incomplete. And so anyways, the rest of the comic is about these characters that travel through a wormhole, and they go back to visit what is apparently the original Earth, but when they turn around to make their return trip, something reaches through the wormhole and grabs them, and suddenly they're in the clutches of these not so nice looking blue aliens who appear to be threatening them, and that's where it ends. And so it does appear to be setting up what was slated in the description of the comic, but it doesn't really give us a lot of information about it. It doesn't give us a lot of information about the conflict. We just know that this exploratory mission has been kidnapped by these hostile aliens, but we don't know why that's happened. We don't know why they've captured them, what they're planning to do with them, and we don't know how our heroes are going to escape from this, nor how this connects back to the first episode with the pink alien. And so it seems like there's a broader plan here. There's clearly a plan for this story, where it's going to go, what it's going to be about, but I feel like more needs to be done for the contest entry to really establish what the tone of this narrative is going to be, and what types of stories we can expect to be told within this framework. So since it's listed as an action sci-fi, it doesn't actually have any action in it. It does a very good job with the sci-fi. I like the opening episode with the character exiting cryosleep. A lot of that, it doesn't really take time to explain any of it, but most of it is pretty quickly picked up by the reader. It's easy to understand, but it also shows a level of intellect behind it. It's cleverly written. It's clear that the sci-fi is not just surface level. It's had some thought behind it, and so that's good to see. I mean, there's another section in the later episodes with the characters trying to grow plants in space and testing different things, and so it shows that there's a level of thought behind the sci-fi, which is always good, because that means it is going to be very intellectual, and that's the type of thing that is often missing from more epic sci-fi stories, where they kind of just focus on the character drama or whatnot, but the science aspect of it is often very interesting, and so it's good to see that that's represented here. I just think that the pacing of this as a contest entry leaves a lot to be desired. It hasn't really set up our main conflict very well. It's only hinted at it. We've met our enemy, which is apparently, let's see, I believe it said it here somewhere. The Croth Empire. Yeah, we've seen them in a panel. We've gotten a first glimpse of them, but we don't know anything about them. We don't know why they're doing the things they're doing, why they might be capturing human vessels, or why their clawed spaceships are being aggressive toward others. And that's the type of thing that we really want to set up here. What type of conflict are we getting into as readers? What type of action can we expect? And what is the overall tone of the story? We want to make sure that we're putting a lot of focus on those things, because we're trying to sell this to the judges of the contest. And so we want to make sure that by the time they've read the 3 episodes, they know what they're getting into. And so it can be good to try and build intrigue and foreshadowing and whatnot for the reader of a long-term series, but we have to remember that we as readers, or even the judges of the contest, don't really know what the long-term of the series looks like, and so they want to be able to envision that based off of the 3 episodes they're given, so that they can determine if the series will be good as an original, as a winner of the contest. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of giving the reader more to bite into, a little bit more information about the world and the conflict. Alright. Nevertheless, though, I do like the attention to detail in the sci-fi. I think it's well done, and I am curious to see where it might go. So, good job on that. Next, we'll be taking a look at Gilded Offering by C.H. Aza. This is a drama fantasy. Let's go ahead and have a read of the description. It says, Dahlia, a mage raised among knights, faces danger on her way back from the capital, but by turning crisis into opportunity, she unveils the magic she long suppressed, thus thrusting her into a path that could challenge fate itself. So, this story is about a rare mage born to non-mage parents who has aspirations of being a fighter, of being a knight, and she is being escorted between places when their caravan is attacked by a pack of wolf-like monsters. And so the knights and the mage herself are forced to get out and fight in order to ensure the safety of everyone traveling. That is effectively all we really get. So as a premise, it's interesting, but it doesn't really give us a lot to latch on to. We get a decent introduction to our main character. We know that as a mage, she's seen as more of a target to be protected, but she wants to be a fighter the way that the knights are, even though she uses magic. She also wants to use swords and fight more traditionally. And we also know that she's a little bit new to magic. She doesn't know that many spells, and she's not that good at them, and so we're seeing her be tested on those as she's using her abilities to try and protect the knights. It does, however, feel like a lot of time is spent explaining some of these things. So here, for example, in episode 2, we have this backstory where we explain the way that she was born. This is just an entirely cutaway scene that takes us out of the moment and is just the author speaking to us. A lot of this backstory, this lore, would be very easy to deliver in a natural dialogue scene, and so it would keep us more immersed in the moment if we found a way to make the characters say these things and have this information given to us by the characters and just have it come up in a conversation somehow, even if it's a little bit contrived. I think that would keep us a little bit more invested in the scenario that we're building here, because we have a tense scenario where our caravan is being attacked. And so cutting away to exposition kind of feels like it's breaking the pacing a little bit. It's breaking the tension in a way that is a little distracting. There's also not very many wide shots that show us where our characters are in relation to each other, and that's the type of thing that could benefit us in what appears to be an action scenario. We've got essentially a confrontation being set up between wolves and knights, and there's a carriage that they're attempting to protect, but we never really see all of those things in the same image, so it's hard to tell as a reader where everything is in relation to each other, and that's the type of thing that's really important in a scene like that. We want to make sure that we're setting those pieces up, like informing the reader where everything is at, and that way they can follow the flow of it all and kind of understand the situation as it's happening. Unfortunately, with this one, it does set up a lot of interesting ideas, and it introduces us to our characters, and our main character especially. It shows us how she's eager to try and fight, she's eager to test herself, and she doesn't want to be protected, but we're building up this conflict that she's about to face with these wolves, and her abilities are about to be tested, but we don't see any resolution to that. It ends before any of the fighting can actually happen, and so we get a small taste of it, but it kind of stops right before the part that we would really want to see, and so it feels like we've spent a lot of time just kind of talking about our main character and having our main characters talk to each other, but nothing like really has happened. It would be nice to speed the pacing up a little bit and just make sure that in the 3 episodes we have that something is happening. And also, I don't really know what the broader narrative is here. I feel like we've set up the situation of mages being rare and whatnot, but I'm not really sure where we're going from here. I'm not really sure what the purpose, what the direction of our story is, and so it's kind of hard to anticipate what direction it might take next. So yeah, I think that adjusting the pacing a little bit and putting the focus on different aspects, maybe setting up what the conflict is, would help. Although opening on this scene, this tense altercation where they're besieged by wolves, is a good choice for getting the readers invested and showing how our characters handle these types of situations, but I think we just need a little bit more. I feel like our 3 episodes could be used a little bit more efficiently to kind of introduce the world and what our character's goal in the world is, what her journey is, what her quest is, and that way we can kind of know what arc we're about to set out on with her. Oh, sorry, I don't think I liked all of these episodes. Let's go back and put likes on them. But yeah, sorry, I don't think with this one that I've done a very good job of kind of explaining my thought process with it, but it's just that, again, when writing a 3-episode intro to your story, you just want to make sure that we know the stakes right away, that we know the overall premise and the general direction that the story might take, and so that's some of the stuff that I felt like I didn't quite get enough of here. I did enjoy it, and I was very eager to see what was going to happen next with this mysterious voice whispering, "Found you," and, you know, we've got hints that her magic might not work the way she wants to, or she doesn't know if she's powerful enough to cast the spell she's trying to cast, but then before we see any of that pay off, it cuts, and then that's the end, and so it just kind of felt like it ended a little bit too soon, like we stopped right in the middle of the action, and I know that there's an emphasis with webtoons on cliffhangers, on kind of leaving the reader curious what's going to happen next, but you also want to make sure that you're giving them enough that they can latch on to it, and so a little bit more of this scenario I think would have benefited this entry. It would have been nice to see a little bit more happen before we cut to our cliffhanger, and so as it stands right now, it doesn't really feel like a natural cliffhanger. It feels more like it just didn't quite get to where it was trying to go, so I just would want a little bit more out of it, but I do think it is setting up a lot of interesting ideas. I do think it has potential. I just wish that I knew a little more about it. So good job, and keep it up. I'll be curious to see where it goes. Okay, next we've got No Strings Attached by Clercy. This is a romance drama. I'll go ahead and read the description and we'll have a look at it. Violinist Hedwig Montgomery couldn't be more perfect, pretty, talented, and from an illustrious musical family. The only problem in her nearly perfect world is Franciszek Winowski, her longtime rival whom she despises more than anyone, and the feeling's mutual, especially after that competition that changed his life 5 years ago. Now at the conservatoire, with the recital nearing, Hetty's shocked to learn she must work with Franek, now a pianist. Will things turn ugly or into something else? Other than having no idea how to pronounce the male lead's name, I think that this is a pretty apt description. It does a good job of selling exactly what we're getting into, and everything that you read there is exactly what we're getting into, and I wanted to say that I think this entry is really good. I enjoyed this a lot, and I really just found myself wanting more of it. It does a great job of establishing the characters. It does a great job of setting up the personalities of the characters and conveying them to the readers and showing us how they interact with each other, how everybody feels about each other, and just it makes very believable characters. We know a little bit about their pasts, we know a little bit about their aspirations and what they're all trying to accomplish, and so it does a very, very good job of building the characters, and in a romance drama, that's exactly what you need. You need well-built characters so that the readers can latch onto them and want to see how they're going to interact with each other, how their lives are going to develop, how these scenarios are going to develop, and as far as scenarios go, this one does a really good job of building a scenario that matters to these characters. There's a looming recital that our main violinist character has to participate in, and she needs a new pianist for it. She can't play alone, and so she's forced to work with her old rival, who was a former violinist who has now become a pianist, and so the two of them working together, despite hating each other and having a long-standing rivalry, can't help but admit that, well, they don't admit, but secretly they admire each other's musical talents, and so we've immediately built a great scenario for a romance drama where we have two characters that don't like each other, that have very strong personalities, that have very well-defined personalities, and are forced to work together. They have no choice but to work with each other despite not liking each other, and what we get is presumably going to be an enemies to lovers love story, and it's just honestly very well done. It's really well paced. It feels like every episode is satisfying, and I'm constantly wondering what's going to happen next. I'm constantly wanting to see more from these characters, and so it's just very, very well written. Another thing that I like about it is that our main character, our main girl, isn't really a good person. She's arrogant, she's self-centered, and she's very, very overconfident, and even though she is talented to back that up, she's not really a good person. Which kind of makes it more interesting to see what happens, because as you're reading it, you want to see her get humbled, but at the same time, you're also kind of cheering for her at the same time, and it just builds an interesting dynamic that's fun to read. There are a few things that I would note about this, which namely is that it seems clear that the author is doesn't speak English as a first language, and so there are a handful of like small typos or little grammatical issues. It might be nice to have someone proofread it and just correct some of those to make sure that the text comes across as professional and that there aren't mistakes in the writing. So I would definitely recommend getting someone to check over the grammar and just make sure that all of that is fine, but I don't think that that is going to be a major issue for this as a contest entry, because that's something that your editor would do if you were to win and become an original. And honestly, I could see this series being an original. It feels like reading an original. It sets out a very clear idea, it sets up very clear relationships, and it sets up very, very easy to understand characters and very fun scenarios with those characters. And so yeah, I really just found myself wanting to keep reading it. The only thing I would say that it's potentially missing is just that third episode hook that Webtoon always looks for. It's got the potential makings of it, it just doesn't happen on the third episode where you would normally think it would. But again, that's another thing that I think probably won't matter as a contest entry, because the judges and the editors would be able to recognize that there is a hook in there and the framework is there. It just maybe would be paced differently if it was an original versus a Canvas series. And so that's the type of thing where you might make a little adjustment to it, but as it stands now, it's perfectly fine. I never felt bored at any point, and I was always wondering what was going to happen next, and it was hard to stop reading, even though it was only 4 episodes. It felt very, very satisfying, and I definitely look forward to seeing more of it. So very good job on that. I'm sorry, I've got my windows rearranged. Here we go. Next, we'll be taking a look at ECLIPSED. This is a romance supernatural by Minnie Falconer, so let's go ahead and read the description and then we'll talk about it a little bit. In a world shaped by gods, Calum has spent eternity unseen, drifting through dreams, unneeded, untouched. Mateo is just a mortal, a dreamer whose life will pass in the blink of an eye compared to Calum's eternity. And yet, against all reason, Calum finds himself drawn to him. What does it mean to love something so temporary, to reach for someone who will one day slip through his fingers like sand? Eclipsed is a story of love, depression, and the ache of holding on to something destined to fade. So, this is presented to us as a romance, and we do hint at the romance by the end of the 3rd episode. I think that this story is rather interesting. It sets an interesting premise from an interesting perspective, and spends a lot of time getting us familiar with one of our main leads, as it is about essentially the Sandman, whose job is to put people to sleep or, look over their dreams. But as an immortal god, he is only able to be seen in people's dreams, so no one is really able to acknowledge his true existence or his true self, and so he is despondent because of it. He feels disconnected from the world, and he wishes that he could be seen and understood and have someone to connect with. And so we spend a lot of time setting that up. We spend a long time kind of laboring that point, and then eventually he happens to find our other main character, Mateo, who is a lucid dreamer, who is the first person who ever recognizes him. He's the first person that ever sees him and is able to interact with him. And so we have our immortal god of sleep, Calum, who finds himself enamored by this lucid dreamer, Mateo, and we see a little bit of their interactions as they meet each other and get to know each other for the first time. I think that this sets an interesting premise. It does a good job of showing a lot of Calum's backstory and a little bit of Mateo's, and it kind of hints at different things that are important to Mateo and what type of life he is leading, and perhaps some things he's dealt with in the past, but we don't go much further than that. And so we've got essentially a premise, but what we don't really have is a framework, and I'll kind of explain what I mean by that. So we have two characters that are essentially star-crossed lovers. They're interacting in dreams, and we know that Calum, as an immortal god, is going to outlive Mateo, but we don't really know much more than that. And so we've set up our two main characters, we've introduced them to each other, but in terms of how their relationship might develop, we don't really have any hint at where it might go. How can Calum, for example, truly interact with Mateo? Can they only interact through dreams? Will they ever be able to interact in the physical world, or is this as good as it's ever going to get for them? And are there consequences for Calum interacting with a human in this way? Is this something that he's allowed to do? What might happen as a result of it? What type of life does Mateo lead? And if he ends up becoming more obsessed with the man in his dreams, how will that impact his waking life? Those are the types of things that we would kind of want to explore a little bit more in this as a contest entry, because even though it does set an interesting premise of a lucid dreamer falling in love with the dream god, it doesn't really build the framework of what this relationship might look like going forward, what problems it might face, and what types of issues we might have to deal with, and what type of stakes there are. Is there some kind of ultimatum, maybe? I mean, there's not a lot of conflict in it yet, and so it's a little bit hard to envision where it might go next, but as a premise, it's pretty good. It's a good idea. It needs a little bit more of a structure, I think, and so I think it's done a good job of introducing its characters and kind of setting up how they interact with each other, but we just need a little bit more to latch on to there. Nevertheless, I will be curious to see where it goes from here. So, good job with that. Did we get all 3 likes? Yes, we did. Oh, sorry, there was hold on, let me bring that window back up. There was something I wanted to mention. Just as a small aside, something that this series does. So a lot of comics will use these transitional panels where we have these empty boxes, these empty panels that kind of denote that the scene is changing. The only trouble here is we are doing that a lot in this comics, changing the scene and showing separation between the scenes, but oftentimes when we get this 2-panel separation, it's a little too close to the neighboring panels, and so like this, for example, when we have a text box here, and then our separation, and then the next scene, it can be hard to tell that we've transitioned scenes because there's not enough space in between them. And so when doing a box transition like this, it's good to make sure that it has enough space. And so I would recommend using longer boxes, bigger boxes that really separate these panels to just help the reader recognize that we are switching scenes, that we're moving forward in time. This one especially. So we go from text in our previous scene to our 2-box transition to our next scene, and this isn't quite enough space to show the reader that the scene has transitioned. So if you're scrolling through this, you might not even notice these boxes because your eyes are drawn to the next speech bubble. And so this kind of confused me when I read it the first time, and I had to go back and realize that we had jumped forward in time. And so we have our characters kind of just having a conversation about daily things, about mundane things, and then we jump to them reacting to a soap opera. And so I was really confused when I read this the first time because I couldn't tell what they were talking about. And then I realized, oh, we've jumped forward. We're watching TV now. So just a small formatting thing. Always try to make sure you leave a lot of space around the transition boxes just so that it really breaks the flow, so that the readers can understand that we are switching scenes. But yes, otherwise, good job, and keep it up. Okay, next we're going to be taking a look at Dragon Blade by Chizilli. This is a action slice of life. So we'll go ahead and read the description, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. It says, Kai's simplistic lifestyle begins to rapidly change after a brush with death, birthing him with otherworldly elemental power known as aura. Kai is chosen as one of the 55th generation's elementals, warriors that strive to restore balance to the world and protect the Dragon Blades, weapons with unknown power residing within, from falling into the wrong hands. Along with his friends, Kai is thrown into the elemental journey of a lifetime, battling dangers the likes his modern world has never seen. Well, as you can probably predict what I'm about to say, this is a very interesting description. Unfortunately, none of that actually happens in the 3 episodes that we're given here, so it's important to think about this when you're constructing a comic, but especially when you're constructing a contest entry that's trying to sell your comic. We need to remember that what you write in this description should be what happens in these episodes. Think about what a description is in this case. So what we're doing here is we're taking the interesting elements of our story, we're taking the tone of our story and the general direction of our story, and we're summarizing it in a handful of sentences to try and get people interested in it. That's exactly what our first 3 episodes need to be doing as well. And so if all of this is in the description, it should also be in the first 3 episodes. And so I want to say, I actually really enjoyed this comic. It's fun to read. It just doesn't really get to the point that it's trying to get to. And so what we have is essentially a prologue over the course of these 3 episodes that is introducing our main characters, and it does a very good job of that. It sets up all of our characters, the different relationships that they have with each other, and the dialogue is written very naturally. It's very believable. It really does feel like a group of friends hanging out and making fun of each other and joking around and whatnot, and the dialogue is all very well written. There is, however, an issue of sometimes there's a little too much dialogue, or too much dialogue in one text bubble. It's nice to split this up sometimes because it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Even if it's fun to read, it's just a lot at one time, and so it does feel like sometimes we are saying a little bit too much in one go, and so it can be a little bit overwhelming. That said, though, yeah, again, the dialogue's very good. It's very fun. It's entertaining. There's a lot of good humor in here. There are a lot of jokes that work, but when this is listed as an action slice of life, it's in the most epic category because it's action first. No action really happens in these 3 episodes. There's a very small altercation, but it's a mundane altercation. It's a single punch being thrown and then a tense stand down, but we don't actually get any fights in these first 3 episodes, and so that's the important thing to remember, is that we are trying to sell this series to the Webtoon editors, so we want to show them what we've got in terms of action, and we want to make sure that they can see what type of fight scenes, what type of action, what type of power scaling they can expect if they were to pick up this series. And so we've done a great job with these 3 episodes of introducing our characters and building up their personalities and getting invested in them and understanding why we should care about them and why we should be invested in them. All of that stuff is important, but if we're trying to sell a slice of life story, we've done an excellent job of it. If we're trying to sell an action story, we've kind of missed out on that a little bit. We need to get into the action stuff in this entry, in this contest entry, in order to make sure that the readers know what they can expect from this series. So we have a lot of expectations being set for the slice of life element. We have a lot of expectations being set for the characters, the way they talk to each other and engage with each other and interact, and all of that stuff is very fun to read. But if there's going to be action, you see, this is the only panel of action we get, and this is good. This shows that the creator knows how to convey action. They know how to make an impactful frame. They know how to show motion and all of that. We need more of that. We should put a lot more focus on that. And so I would suggest, again, as a contest entry, really all of the setup with the characters going to the party and having our main character left out in the rain and how this gets him involved in the elemental situation. All of this setup should really happen in the first episode. We should condense it down and allow ourselves to get into the action a little bit faster, because if we only have 3 episodes to sell this series, we want to make sure that we're highlighting what's important here. And again, I do think that a lot of what we've got is really good stuff. I just don't think that it's quite getting to the part that really truly matters, which is the story that was laid out in the description. So while we have an excellent understanding of our characters, we have really no idea what the action is going to be like. We don't really know what the conflict is. We don't know really what they're going to be fighting against, what those fights might look like, why the characters should be invested in those fights, how they feel about being dragged into this conflict. That's all of the type of thing that I would like to have seen set up a little bit better. But I do think that this series shows a lot of potential. I think that clearly there is a lot of thought behind the characters. There's a strong believability behind the characters. There's a relatability to them, and so that's all very good stuff. That means that if we were to continue this comic, we would definitely be able to get invested in their journey. It's just that the journey itself is kind of the part we're missing. Also, I will say this does end on a very strong cliffhanger, which is good. That shows that we're keeping pacing in mind. We know that we want to hook people with the 3rd episode. It's just that, again, I wish that we had seen more of the actual tone that we're trying to set for this comic, the action, the confrontations. And so I like this one a lot. I really did enjoy it, and I very much want to see more of it. But I am a little concerned that we didn't quite get to the point within these 3 episodes, and I think that that might hurt it in the contest. But do keep up the good work. I think that there's a lot of potential here, and I'm very curious to see where it goes. I can't wait to get to the good stuff. Okay, next up we have Swallow by Urine. This is a thriller drama. Let's go ahead and read the description, and then we'll talk a little about it. So, it says, after killing his brilliant best friend, Adrian seizes the chance to take over his life, along with its many coveted perks and relationships. But he comes to realize that dressing in another man's skin comes with some ravenous consequences. This series is very, very interesting. So, let's dive into it, and I'll talk a little bit about it. Now, we know from the description that our main character has killed his best friend. We already know going into the comic that that's going to happen. More importantly, though, it's the first scene that we get, so it's not only laid out in the description, it also happens immediately in the context of the comic itself, and so we really jump right into it. We've got this cloud looming over us because we start with the flash forward to the murder, and so we know that this is coming. And that creates a sort of tension because we're waiting to just see, okay, well, how did we get here? How did we get to a situation where our main character is wearing a mask of his best friend's face and murdering him? And well, we're going to find that out. We jump back 1 week ago, and then we begin to establish exactly how that happens. And so it does a really good job setting up our characters, setting up their relationships to each other, and the different aspects of their personalities. And it does a lot of that even just by showing and not explicitly explaining it. So there are a lot of things that are worked in detail-wise that aren't stated out loud by the characters, but that you can pick up on just by paying attention. And that's something that I want to say that... Hold on, I think I didn't like that. Sorry. I must admit, I am every Webtoon author's worst enemy, so I don't usually engage with comics. I never subscribe to anything. I never like anything, and I don't comment much. I tend to just lurk, and so I've been putting likes on every episode that we review here, but sometimes I forget because I just don't have the muscle memory for it. I apologize. No, but anyway, I wanted to say that something that this author does really well is lay out the details and lay out different aspects of the plot that are going to be important later, but without putting too much emphasis on them. And so what this does is allow the reader to pick up on those details, to pick up on those subtle hints and clues, and kind of figure out where things are going. And that's very important, especially in the mystery genre. That would be one of the most important aspects, but in horror or thriller, that's very important as well, because if we want to keep our reader engaged in what starts out as a relatively mundane narrative, we kind of want to be feeding them breadcrumbs that are going to lead to something more interesting, feeding them pieces of a puzzle that are going to come together later. And this comic does that really, really well. It does a great job of showing us different parts of our characters' personalities, different interactions that they have, and different details. And we don't know immediately why those things matter, but we start to find them out, and as it unfolds, it's conveyed in a way that it allows the reader to put the puzzle together, and that is an excellent way to write a story like this, because it helps engage the reader more, and so it gets you invested in it. If you feel like you're solving the mystery, if you feel like you're trying to solve the puzzle, solve the equation, that makes you hold interest in it better, because you want to keep clicking through to see and find out if you're right, or you know, if your expectations are going to be met, or if you're going to be surprised in some way. And so that's a very, very good way of writing it. It shows writing talent to be able to do that, to be able to layer in those hints and that foreshadowing, but not give the whole thing away, but give enough details to keep you guessing, to keep you speculating and thinking and trying to figure it out. And that was something that I really liked about this one. And by the 5th episode, the final episode that this entry has, you've got a lot to work with, and you can kind of start to put the pieces together, and you get a good idea of where it's going to go next, and also why. And so that was something that I haven't seen very many comics do very well, but this one has done exceptionally well. And so I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that, because that really stood out to me by the time I got through the 5th episode here. The only thing that I would say negatively about that pacing, about that writing, is that, again, it's that classic Webtoon problem. We don't necessarily nail the hook by the 3rd episode, and so I know that a lot of people are probably tired of hearing me talk about that, and I know it sounds arbitrary, but trust me, that is something that Webtoon is looking for. And any material that Webtoon has released talking about how to sell your comic to them, they always hammer in the point that they really want to have the hook by the 3rd episode. And so you want to make sure that your first 3 episodes are doing everything they can to establish the important aspects, and then ending with some kind of hook, some kind of lead-in that is going to convince people to stay around, because that's a very important part of the Webtoon business model. And so if you can demonstrate that to them, that shows them that you know what type of stories they're looking for. And so that's something that they look out for. Now, I will say that for this contest, I don't think that every entry necessarily has to have the 3-episode hook. It's just that it has to have the setup for it. Because if you're reading this as an editor, you're going to be thinking, okay, well, what is the element we can use as a hook to get people to subscribe at the 3rd episode? What's something, an aspect of the plot that we can move to the 3rd episode to act as that hook, to get people connected with the story and really intrigued to see where it goes next? And so that's something I'll say about this story, that even though it doesn't land the hook on episode 3, the hook comes at episode 5. And so if you were to condense these 5 episodes into 3, you would have a perfect opening for this type of story. And so again, even though it doesn't do it in 3 episodes, I think that it still has probably what the Webtoon editors are looking for. And so it does a great job of that. Otherwise, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this series. It does a good job of setting up our characters and introducing, who they are and how they feel about each other, which is obviously going to be important later, while still having its share of twists and turns that we might not be expecting. And so I do think that this probably has a really good chance of placing in the most gripping category. And I personally am very curious to see where it's going to go from here, because it's left us at a point where we've established by the end of the 5th episode everything that was described in the description, but we've gone obviously into detail on it, and we end on a cliffhanger that really leaves us wondering what's going to come next. But we still haven't caught up to the present that we started with at the beginning of the comic. We still haven't caught up to the murder happening, and so we're not sure how we're going to get to that point yet, even though we know that it's coming, and even though we know that there are going to be consequences for it. It's kind of showing us where it leaves off here on episode 5, that this is a more complicated situation than we initially thought, and it was already pretty complicated from the get-go. So yeah, I think this one does almost everything right. It's really, really good. It's very engaging, and it's really interesting. So I am very excited to see where it goes from here. So good job on that. All right. Well, that is all 10 of our episodes. My goodness, we have gone long on this one. I apologize. I have been trying to keep these as short as possible because there's so many to do. I didn't expect to go for almost an hour and a half here. But, well, I suppose there's just a lot to say on some of these, but I think we've seen a lot of good stuff here today, though, and there's a lot of potential here, and how fun will it be when we finally get a reveal of who the winners of the contest are? How fun will it be to see which of these series that we've read have actually made it? And speaking of series that probably won't make it, here's mine. If you're interested in horror thrillers, you can check out my contest entry, Dumpster Girl. It's about a ghost and garbage, so definitely consider giving that a look. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about it. Anyways, I'll take us back to our Reddit post now. We're still at, goodness, we've got another comment since I last checked it. At my last count, we had around 80 series to review, and I will be doing every single one that I've gotten requested for, and so we're going to keep working our way through these, but there are a lot more to come, so if you've been waiting for yours, don't worry, it will happen. I'm going to review every series that has been responded to this thread. It's just going to take me a little while to get through them because there is a lot to read. Anyways, if you've watched this far, let me know, out of the 10 here, which one do you think was the most interesting? Which would you like to see more of? And what would you recommend? Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and can't get to the end of this. Sorry, I'm fumbling a little bit. We're going to go ahead and end here. So, thank you for watching, and I will see you in your nightmares.